All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the State Water Infrastructure Authority to order. We are reconvening for day 2 of the meeting. Again, we have authority members who are in person as well as online. For those online, just feel free to do what we did yesterday. Raise your hand if you would like to interject or have a question, or just unmute yourself and just join the conversation. For those in the room, we're using the same 2 Bluetooth speakers. Again, they're always on, so they'll pick up any side conversations. So please try to minimize that so that the audio is clear for those online. A reminder to the public that's listening in, we are not using the chat function to communicate with the authority members. All the communication is happening within the authority members, and we have a time dedicated towards the end of today's session for informal comments from the public. Nobody has signed on to provide comments online. If there's somebody in person that would like to provide informal comments, they're welcome to do so. On the agenda today, we have a few action items. So again, we should consider any potential conflicts of interest. State Government Ethics Act, North Carolina General Statute 138A mandates that the chair inquires as to whether there are any known or potential conflicts of interest with respect to any matter before the authority members today. If you know of a conflict or a potential conflict, please identify that at the time that the conflict becomes apparent. Is there any conflicts that anybody would like to acknowledge today, or potential conflict? Okay. We will. This agenda today, I think, runs till about lunchtime. But as we found out yesterday, the agenda might say one thing, and then we might actually end early, which was a nice surprise. So we're trying to manage the time for today's agenda. We do have a break in the middle of the agenda. We'll manage that as we go along. Let's take roll call, and we'll start with those online, which will also serve as our audio check. So let's see who's online. Melody?
Good morning.
Morning, Melody. Sharon?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Sharon. Johan?
Good morning.
Morning. And Leela?
Good morning.
Morning, Leela. In the room, Bill?
Here.
Thank you. Bernadette?
Definitely here.
All right. And Maria?
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Ed, again, is unable to join us today, so he will not be online or in person. Thank you. We do have a quorum. All right. Next slides. First, so today we'll be talking a lot about priority rating systems, and the action items are to finalize those rating systems. And the first agenda item is to talk about the drinking water and wastewater. I think first John's going to be presenting on the intended use plans before we talk about the priority rating systems. So John, take it away.
Great, thanks, Shadi. And yeah, just to clarify that. So the first agenda item P, is not an action item. It's to just summarize the comments that were received on the intended use plans for a bunch of different funding and funding programs. And then the next agenda item, Q, is the priority rating system for those programs, and that will be an action item. There is no staff report for this item. There was for item Q. So just to summarize intended use plans, these, you've heard all this before, but this is required as part of the annual capitalization grant application to EPA. And they outline how we're going to administer some of our funds, the state revolving fund program in particular. Updated annually, requires a public review process. Part of the intended use plan is the priority rating system, and that is under the authority's job duties to approve that and to establish the priority rating system. I think one of the greatest things about our funding programs is we try to minimize the priority rating systems so that we can use them for multiple funding programs. So the priority rating systems that you approve are for multiple programs. The intended use plans that I'm talking about are specific to state revolving Okay, so, and again, all of the comments related to the priority rating system, I'm going to hold those and we'll talk about them in the next agenda item. So this presentation is strictly those comments about the other items in the intended use plan. So the last IUP for the state revolving fund programs, the base programs were last updated in the summer of 2022. The current IUP update, the priority rating system was approved by the authority during the April meeting, was out for public review for about a month. The next agenda item today is to hopefully finalize the priority rating system. With that in the IUP, we then can have it be in effect for the fall funding round, not the one that you just approved, obviously, but the next one. Okay, so today, again, I'm just going to really focus on those comments that resulted in updates or changes to the intended use plan or other comments that that staff is going to continue to evaluate and continue to look at for future IUPs. All of the comments and responses, recommendations are part of the intended use plan, which we will provide in the website for the public. So choose to review that. Any minor changes, just to address clarity or word use, I'm not going to go over those today. Okay, so what were some of the questions, concerns that were raised during the public comment period? First one is fairly simple. Questions, concerns over what looked like the removal of some of the programmatic goals from the drinking water SRF intended use plan. That was not the intent. Those have been re-added and included to the IUP. Another comment was just some uncertainty in the use of disadvantaged areas in the intended use plan. And that, I mean, that's something that we continue to look at and to develop. It's still a new concept, a new idea, how to provide prioritization for projects that are providing a benefit to a disadvantaged area, as well as how is that principal forgiveness going to work. There actually were no changes as a result of the comments, but this is definitely something that staff continue to look at. Currently, it's narrative driven, so we're asking the applicants to explain how their project benefits the disadvantaged area. So there's some uncertainty on how they do that. So we're continuing to look for, metrics or other ways so that the applicants can know when they submit their applications if they're going to meet that criteria or not. But it's a very complex issue, and so we do like that they have some flexibility to explain why this project meets the criteria. We're trying to find the best fit to do that.
And John, just to add to that, one of the actions that you all had approved in the April meeting was to make the priority points in the rating system. I don't know if that'll be in the next agenda item or not, but to make the priority points for the benefits and disadvantaged areas be as an alternate to the LGU indicator. So you can't get both. It's not that you get the same points for the LGU indicators and the disadvantaged areas. It's one or the other. So that's you've already discussed that and already approved that in the draft rating system, and you'll see the rating system in the next agenda item. But that's one of the clarifications I think that came out of this.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pause after every slide to see if you have any questions. A third comment we received is just to encourage to continue to look at flood risk tools. The department is I don't know if it's Department of Resiliency, but a number of different tools that are in development were noted in the comments, encouraging the division to be looking at those tools and seeing if we can incorporate them into our prioritization system, our application system, just to recognize other means to demonstrate that projects are looking at resiliency, looking at flood risk, and addressing those risks. So that, again, is an ongoing thing that staff will be looking at to make sure that tools that are available are part of our process. I said I'd pause, so I will. Any questions at this point? Nope.
Not a question, but did just receive a newsletter from the Golden Leaf Foundation. And they just awarded about $9 million in flood mitigation grants. And so just thinking about making that connection with Golden Leaf and potentially emergency management about ongoing or potential flood mitigation projects that maybe have already received funding or maybe didn't receive funding for any of a number of reasons, but just making that connection between other funders of flood mitigation, especially since one of the concerns that we have with these particular grants is, the effect on downstream communities. So just suggesting to maybe make that connection.
Thank you, Melody. Yeah, that's a Golden Leaf. They're the BRIC grants as well. Obviously, there's USDA and other funding agencies. Absolutely, and I think we've been kind of circling around the idea of restarting the funders forums where there will be meetings of all the different funding agencies, so we can communicate and talk about the projects that we're all funding. Like to kind of come back to that this year and try to restart. Now that we're develop all these funding programs, I think now is a really good time to do those kind of connections that you're suggesting, Melody.
That sounds great.
Thank you. Okay, two more comments, questions that we received. Request to expand the eligibility of the emerging contaminant funds, the bill EC funds, to compounds other than PFAS. Certainly open to that. However, staff and the department really feel the focus for this first year of funds, the 2022 year funds, should be on PFAS. So this would be something that we'll look at project demand over the next year, as well as just other information that we get from communities, other project types that we see during the process, to see if there's a need to expand to other types of emerging contaminants for those funds.
And as a reminder, other emerging contaminants are eligible for the base SRF programs as well. So we can fund other emerging contaminants, but the EC specific funding will continue to be just for PFAS.
Thank you. And the priority rating system does have a hierarchy of projects that address MCLs, projects that address promulgated not lead effective requirements, to try to give projects that are addressing other emerging contaminants and priority. I'll receive requests to simplify the application process, ensure that a single application will be used for multiple funding sources, including EC funds. So staff definitely recognize that the application process is getting more and more complicated, and recognize the need to try to keep it simple. The EC funds the intent is to incorporate them into a single application process. So we're not asking the communities to submit multiple applications for different funding sources. And then I've called out, you'll see this in the next presentation, those priority items that are eligible for consideration for the bill EC funds. And staff completely agree. We need to keep it simple, and we need to keep it one application process if we can. Questions? Nope. Request to consider potential. Oh, okay. So this one is related again to emerging contaminant, the bill EC funds, and the commenter noted that there's additional funds that the department can get that's been made eligible from EPA, and just wants to make sure that we're considering all the different potential sources of funding to help address PFAS and emerging contaminants in the IUP. And yes, we will do that. If an IUP is required, or work plans, or IUPs, those definitely will go to public comment and consider those comments in forming the IUP. So historically, how the division has handled other funding sources that may fall outside of the authority's purview We received some disaster recovery funds, 2017, 2018 time period. But we still use the regular priority rating system and then just call out those projects that would potentially receive those other funding sources and let the authority know that those projects have been funded to another source, and that's why they're not shown for funding in your recommendations. So we use the same process. We fund the highest scoring projects with the best money available. It's one of our core things, and that's what we would do likely if we get additional funds for EC. The other reason. A little complicated. Any questions on that one? Okay. Request to provide 0% interest to any project jointly funded with the bill SRF emerging contaminant funds and the regular base SRF or the state reserve repayable loan. Certainly looking to help support all of our projects, but staff didn't feel like giving all of those projects a 0% interest is appropriate at this time. We'll considering emerging contaminants a targeted interest rate for future IUPs. And then also just note that if a community is eligible for principal forgiveness, 25, 50, 75, or 100, they are eligible for target interest rates and either a 1% reduction or 0% based on the affordability criteria. The IUP included a reserve of 50% of the emerging contaminant funds to be held for studies. The concept there is if there is not sufficient demand for studies, the reserve would be eligible and would make recommendations to award all of the funds to construction projects or other project types. The Department Public Water Supply really prioritized that communities are doing these evaluations and looking at options before jumping into a capital project. This reserve would allow more communities to do that, especially considering the extremely high capital costs of some of these projects could easily eat up all of the available funds real quick. And so the idea is more communities can do more work upfront to determine what is their best course of action, what treatment technologies would work. And then again, the way it's set up, if there is not sufficient demand in the application process to do the studies, those funds would automatically be available, that same funding round for other types of eligible projects.
I'll add that this also stems from the fact that as the department continues to work with water systems across the state and sampling water systems across the state, we're finding PFAS in systems across the state. And more systems are identifying them and realizing we have to do something about it. And reserving 50% of the funds to help those systems come up with a plan will at least help more systems than, and we're only talking small dollars here because 2 years of capitalization is $44 million from the drinking water. Won't go very far with construction projects. So reserving 50% for studies will help those systems at least come up with plans that might hopefully long-term be cheaper options than to look for the treatment options that are available right now. Plus they'd have to do evaluation to show that those are effective treatment technologies as they're doing construction projects anyway. So this will get them along that front or do that work up front.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that? We have received requests to adjust the construction project limits. The limit in the IUP was $5 million. The request was to reduce it to 3 to spread the funds around. Staff feel that, at least for this first round, $5 million should be adequate. We'll again see what we get from applications, project types, et cetera, and make adjustments in the future if we feel it's needed. Kind of weighing the potential project costs and desire, if possible, to fully fund projects so they can get to construction more quickly versus, again, spreading these funds out to multiple communities and potentially not fully funding projects. It's kind of a balance. So we've still got a lot to learn to see what types of projects we're going to get, but certainly open to revisiting this in future IUPs. And then a request to establish a funding limit for study grants. So the IEP was updated to increase the cap from $400,000 to $500,000 per applicant per round for study grants. Provide a little bit more funds for those types of projects.
Might be helpful to remind everyone that the EC funding is 100% principal forgiveness. So when we say study grants, we don't mean grants, we mean principal forgiveness loans. But this is all the EC funding is principal forgiveness dollars.
Thank you, Shadi. Try not to say grants. Surprised that I did. This next slide was in your packet, but this is actually a part of the priority rating system. So removed, it'll show up in blue again later. So, and then this, I think this is my last slide. Yeah, just to, really, again, recognize the importance of the public review and public comment period. We're getting good comments. We're getting, obviously the stakeholders are interested and engaged in the program, and that's really important to the success of this program. Just wanted to recognize that. For the focus of the comments that we received really were related to the emerging contaminants program, which is great because it's a new program. And we're really looking for ideas, comments, supports from those that are going to be impacted by these funds. So that's great. I didn't cover most of those comments. That's the next agenda item. We'll get to that later. And again, just thank those that submitted comments. It's really important to the process. Any questions from you?
Can I add on?
Not a question, but kind of a comment. Kind of in conjunction with the stormwater study that DEQ is in process of doing right now, and having those results available to units of local government to make funding and or project decisions about the best ways and the needs for stormwater mitigation. I could see that since the emerging contaminants program is also a new program, something similar could be very beneficial to local governments as they begin to understand how emerging contaminants are affecting, upstream and downstream water systems, and that the department could provide a real leadership role in helping local governments plan and develop systems that have been vetted at higher levels than just locally, perhaps convening engineers and other experts in coming up with some really good recommended strategies for different types of systems and different sizes of systems, so that each local government isn't out redeveloping their own wheel that's different from the wheel next door and upstream and downstream, simply for the fact that these are new technologies and there's probably little in the way of technical knowledge and know-how at the local level to be able to develop and manage these systems. And as we look to ways to regionalize and, help provide access to managed systems where, you've got one person trying to manage multiple systems, having some standardization with regard to technology could be beneficial in the sharing of resources, the contracting in terms of getting good pricing, and then also making those systems easier to manage because there is some shared technology out there as opposed to every system being different.
Melody, that's an excellent point. And it's right along the lines of what DEQ is doing. And this goes beyond our division as well. So their DEQ leadership and management is working on PFAS on multiple fronts. There's a PFAS action strategy, and there's a lot of work from the department with water systems And DEQ is taking a lead in kind of what you're talking about. It's let's figure out this as a statewide issue, and let's try to, as DEQ, provide that assistance to systems so that not every system is on their own trying to figure this out, to reinvent the wheel, to do their own projects. So that's part of the reason why we bought that 50% reserve for studies, because we could then provide that assistance through that process. The department, again, I think Division of Water Resources and DEQ leadership are doing additional work in doing that kind of technical assistance, I guess might be the best way of describing it. I'm not in the best position to tell you all those details. I think it's something that the department continues to work on. But that's the idea of trying to use the study reserves to help so that we would be able to provide input to those systems, and yeah, look for regional options if that's an opportunity, or to look at if you put in this new treatment technology, do you have the right expertise on staff to be able to manage and operate those systems? But yeah, so yes, I agree with all that. There's also going to be, I wanted to add this too, that with the EC, one of the comments we received was about targeted outreach and to try to direct the funding to the systems where DEQ knows there are PFAS issues, because we are out there sampling, we are working with systems, we are identifying where there are PFAS needs. And there's going to be, with the Bill EC funding, some of that targeted outreach where if we know there are systems that have PFAS issues, we will directly let them know about the funding opportunities. Now, they still need to apply, but we could at least direct them to that funding opportunity. And we'll be doing, alongside other divisions and with DEQ leadership, more and more outreach about PFAS and those funding opportunities. So I think we're trying to address what you're describing, but it's a great point to kind of keep it really clear in front of us and try to keep working in that. And it might go beyond funding. It might be more of a departmental work as well.
Excellent. Appreciate that.
Right, any other questions on intended use plans? All right, well, let's keep on going. The next agenda item Q, is staff's recommendations to finalize priority rating systems for drinking water, wastewater projects, and emerging contaminants. This is an action item. You do have a staff report for this one. Staff report has more detail than what I'll go over in the presentation, as well as more detailed staff recommendations when we get to the end. So priority rating, so General Statute 159G71 establishes the responsibilities of the authority, and one of those is to establish priorities for making loans and grants under the water infrastructure. So this agenda item is more than just the SRF program, which I just talked about for the IUPs. The priority rating systems that we're bringing to you today would cover all of those six different funding programs, both clean water or wastewater projects, as well as drinking water projects. It includes the state reserve, which covers both drinking water and wastewater reserves. For capital projects, there's a separate priority rating system for the study grants, AIAs and MRS, and includes capital projects to be funded under the Viable Utility Reserve. Again, all of those go into a single priority rating system, so we can provide the best money available to the highest priority projects. Again, the priority rating system was last approved July of last year. Same schedule as the intended use plan. So you've seen this slide earlier, just a couple minutes ago. Okay, so we took the, let's see, public review was June through July. Approved by the authority in the April meeting. And what was taken out to public review was the priority rating system as approved by the authority, in order to try to get some really specific feedback and comments during the public review process. We also took out an example priority rating system that really focused on emerging contaminant funds. There's a lot of line items in the priority rating system. And so the idea was to try to focus the public on those items that would be applicable to emerging contaminants and get comments on that approach. Again, to focus on PFAS. We also specifically called out 2 priority line items, 1J3, which is PFAS studies, and whether or not we should consider increasing those priority points from 2 to 5. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was 10 points for 1J1 and 1J2. It was a hierarchy of points. If you were addressing an MCL or a proposed MCL or hazard index, it was the highest number of points, was a little bit less. No, it was the same.
20 points if it's if their construction project is 100% focused on PFAS, 15 points if it's 75%, and then the studies were proposed at 2 points, but we asked if it should go up to 5.
Thank you. I was switching it with 1H3 in my head. And then also 1H3, projects that address PFAS exceeding 10 PPT, potentially increase those points from 2 to 5. And that's where we had 2H1 and 2 were more for the proposed MCLs and the hazard index, the third category. Okay, so I mentioned already the staff. So the staff report has a complete listing of comments and responses. I'm just going to hit the highlights. All right, so we received multiple comments or concerns with the potential use of 2 separate priority rating systems. Again, focusing there of, wait a minute, we're trying to do one application process. Now are you going to have, do they have to submit 2 applications to be considered for the different funding sources? So that was not the intent. Is this going to cause, this is confusing. We want to avoid confusion. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it transparent. And again, let's do it in one application. And that was always the intent when we kind of highlighted this second system to focus on priority on those items that would be eligible for emerging contaminants. So of course, yeah, we have similar concerns with that. That was not the intent. So what you'll see at the end is it's an application. It would be a single application. We would look at an application for regular SRF funds, and we would consider all the normal line items that you've approved previously. For a project that is also seeking emerging contaminant funds, they would only be considered for select line items that are addressing PFAS. It would also include affordability criteria. You'll see all that. It's in the staff report. And so it would be staff's responsibility to look at which line items apply for which funding source and bring that to the authority for recommendations. It hopefully will have little or no impact on the applicant and the complexity of filling out the application. I want to make sure I covered everything on that. Yep. Okay. We received comments to consider updating the affordability criteria, and they're really focusing on, hey, these local government unit indicators are a good sign if a community has affordability issues or not, but there's uncertainty in the data. Sometimes it's a little old. A good example, not of age, but of a data that may not always be maybe as relevant as it could be is the unemployment data, which is a county-wide metric. It's not for the individual communities. And so they were questioning is, should we be giving different higher level prioritization just based off of one LGU indicator? I think it's a good comment, and it's something that staff really need to spend some more time looking at and then bringing recommendations to the authority for future IUPs. So there's not a recommendation to change the priority rating system at this time, but definitely a call for staff to continue to look at that. Received comment to reduce project purpose point requirements for emerging contaminant projects, to include projects with less than 75% of the budget to support, address emerging contaminants. This is 1J points. So Shadi mentioned there's one priority line item for 100% of the project costs, and then lower priority with a 75% threshold. Asking to reduce that 75% threshold. Staff really wants to call out that the bill implementation memo requires the primary purpose of the EC funds to to address PFAS. So staff really feel like we really want to identify those projects where the primary purpose, 75% or greater, is to address PFAS, and then make those EC funds available to those projects. Again, of course, we'll look at project demand and make recommendations for future IUPs and priority rating systems. One minor change that we are recommending is in the 1J1, 1J3 priority language. We used the word, I can't remember what we changed.
We used main.
We used main and we switched to Seoul.
Yeah.
Just to be more clear that it is the purpose. Thank you, Shadi. We received recommendations to increase the priority point items for 1J3 and 2H3 to address PFAS exceeding 10 ppts. And we also received comments to leave them where they were. So a mixed bag. We asked for comments on these. We got comments, but it really wasn't a strong argument either way. Both staff recommend increasing both items to 5 points. Yeah. Both 1J3 and 2J3. 1J3 will incentivize those study grant projects, which we think is a great idea. Again, the department and public water supply would really like to focus on getting funds to communities so they can assess alternatives and figure out what their plan should be to help address PFAS. And for 2H3, there was also a change to 2H3 to expand it. I'm not clear. It's not clear on the slide. So
I have you may read what the rating system says.
Please.
So original 2H3 was projects that address any PFAS compounds exceeding 10 ppt. We're recommending, or staff is recommending to have that be project addresses any PFAS compounds exceeding 10 ppt or state established regulatory standards or limits, and increasing the points from 2 points to 5 points.
Thank you. And so the second part just positions the priority rating system a little bit better to as state standards are developed, that we can include them more quickly into consideration for priority rating systems. So how we will do that is through the guidance, and the guidance will as those state standards are developed, open that up for prioritization consideration.
Yeah, the authority would be creating the ability for staff to be able to add that to the guidance for that 2H3 by adding that language in line item 2H3.
This will potentially specifically help on the wastewater side as potential biosolid standards are developed, or water quality standards are established, or effluent standards are established more quickly. All right, so this was the slide that was in the wrong spot. When concerns were raised with that projects that connect private wells contaminating PFAS may get priority over contaminated public water supplies. That certainly wasn't the intent. There, a line item 2B1 actually went to public comment with two different types of languages. When last year's priority rating system was developed, 2B1 included considerations for PFAS, so that if they were addressing PFAS, the project could get 2B1 points. Well, when we created the new 1J1 line items and the new 2H3 line items, it looked like there was some redundancy and ability for projects to get 2B1 points and points. Really wasn't the intent. So the result of this is clarifying that 2B1 will no longer include PFAS, like it was 2 years ago, because all the pre-FAS consideration is now in specific line items, the 1J and the 2H line items. That was a good catch. Some other staff recommendations where we didn't necessarily get a specific comments on these items, but they came up in assessing the comments, reading the reviews, and looking at the program holistically. 2H4 and 2H5 priority points addresses PFAS exceeding proposed MCLs. This is what Shadi mentioned earlier, and hazardous indexes.
I would say hazard index, but yeah.
Hazard index. Oh, no, this is not what Shadi mentioned before.
Yeah.
So 2H4 and 2H5 went to public review as two separate line items. Both were 10 priority points. 2H4 was exceeding the proposed MCL. 2H5 was exceeding the hazard index. Those items are now recommended to be combined to a single line item.
On the regulatory side, it's pretty much the same thing, whether you're exceeding proposed MCL or the proposed hazard index. It's being treated the same way. So, and we already had 10 points for each. So it's just just simplifying the rating system.
And the other change, this is the last one. The other change was to the clean water SRF bill priority rating system. Some of the line items were not shown in the priority rating system, just to make them consistent with drinking water program 1J, 1J1 through 3, 2F2, and 2H3 would be included in the clean water program as well. So they more mirror each other.
John, there's one more that I think we want to start. I apologize. 2H2, when I was proposed it to the authority in April, we had added in parentheses, this includes, so this was 2H2 is projects that addresses contamination of a water supply source other than acute contamination. And we put parentheses, this includes 1,4-dioxane and manganese, mostly just to communicate to the authority and to the public when it got to the public review. So everybody knows that 1,4-dioxane wouldn't get 2H3 points, but they would get 2H2 points. We're proposing that we just strike that language from the rating system itself. It will be clear in the guidance, but it was just as a communication. It doesn't need to be in the rating system explicitly that way.
Yeah, 1,4-dioxane and manganese are both meet that criteria, whether we include it in that in parentheses or not.
Mhm.
All right. So staff's recommendation is to approve the following priority rating systems as shown in the staff report. For wastewater construction projects eligible for a clean water SRF, wastewater reserve capital projects only, utility reserve, wastewater capital projects only, and then the clean water SRF bill emerging contaminants and specific line items only. So here's where I want to just pause for a second, direct you to your staff reports, and you'll see for this priority rating system, there's a new column just to the right of where we identify the different line items. And that is to identify those priority line items that will be used for the emerging contaminant funds. So they have an EC in that column. Those line items are also considered for all of the other regular SRF types of projects, state reserve capital projects. But when we're ranking or evaluating projects for EC funds, only those items will be used for bill EC funds. We did the same thing for drinking water. And the staff report shows a priority rating system for your consideration for the DWSRF base funds, drinking water reserve, state reserve for capital projects, viable utility reserve for drinking water, and then the new bill emerging contaminant funds. And with that, do you have any questions for me?
I'll give you all a second to look through staff reports and ask John any questions. Not seeing anything online. And if it helps to look at the EC specific line items, there's also attachment C and D that just as a presentation show you, these are the line items that would be considered for the EC funding. Just as a simple for the authority members to see that. And any questions online? Any comments?
I think we're all just a bit, maybe overwhelmed is not the right word, but it's just a lot. Certainly appreciate staff being able to take all these comments and analyze them and then make decisions and reformulate as deemed appropriate. So thank you to staff. But yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It might be helpful, thank you, Melody. It might be helpful if we just kind of take this piece by piece. Let me, if you all allow me, I'm just going to ask about specific things and see if you have any comments about those specific things. That might help with the conversation. So we're not trying to handle everything all at once. I think you're right, Melody. It's just a lot to consider. Starting with just the idea of using, well, okay, this will be let's start with the easy one. Any objections or any thoughts about changing the word main purpose to sole purpose for the 1J1 and 1J3? Okay, shaking of heads, no one's going on mute. Any questions about raising the points for the 1J3 item and the 2H3 item from 2 points to 5 points? So that is definitely need the authorities, your vote on this, and it will be part of the overall vote. But any thoughts, any questions about that, about raising the points for sole purpose is to evaluate alternatives to address emerging contaminants to 5 points, and raising the points for projects addressing PFAS compounds exceeding 10 ppts or state established regulatory standards or limits to 5 points.
That one's got 10 crossed out and then 5, so we're actually lowering to
No.
3, or was it
2H3 is going from, it's got, where do you see 10 going to 5?
page 15?
Page 11, interesting. Oh, all right, thank you. We have to explain 2 different ones. Page 11, yeah, page 11 on the drinking water side, it's going from 2 to 5. Page 15 was a different issue where page 15 had, that was the old 2H3 from last year that encompassed everything that was emerging contaminants. John mentioned that we're bringing in 2H4 to mimic the drinking water. So the 10 points moves to 2H4. And then 2H3 now becomes, again, the 10 ppt, and that would be a drop to 5. You're right. And the scaling again is the 10 ppt or state established would be 5 points compared to proposed MCLs or hazard index for PFAS would be 10 points. So it's halfway there. The studies, the evaluations would be 5 points, which compares to a project construction project that's 100% focused on PFAS is 20 points. That's still a big difference, but it's reflective of, raising it to 5 is reflective of the prioritization. This is still an important project.
So then does that mean that planning projects would be competing against construction projects for EC funds?
So they are, but there also is that 50% funding reserve in place. So even if a study project does not score as well, they still will have an opportunity for EC funds where they may not fare as well is in the regular SRF priority rating system and getting SRF loan funds.
And the 50% reserve is 100% principal forgiveness, is that correct?
That is correct.
And it's limited to 500,000
500,000
per applicant per round.
So I think you'll see similar like we do with the Green Project Reserve or when we bypass projects to meet this small system reserve in the drinking water program. Well, you'll start to see projects that are bypassed in order to get lower in the prioritization limit to meet that reserve and funding more PFAS related studies with that bill EC funds.
Any other questions about the 2 points to 5 points, or I guess it's 10 to 5? Okay, move on to the next one. We have nothing in the LGU indicators that we changed. So the next one is, well, I think we'll tackle the bigger one, which is the concept of using the one rating system for applicants when they're applying. So applicants will have one application with all the rating systems in front of them. But for projects that are EC focused or PFAS focused, that may be PFAS eligible, will only get scored on specific line items. Those were listed in that column that says EC line item. So as the staff are reviewing the applications for EC funding, first have to identify which ones are eligible and then score them under the EC columns and provide and rank them according to the EC scores only. Present those to the authority for awards from the EC funds. Same project will get a different score for their entire rating system that would apply for the regular SRF. That one application can be considered for 2 funding sources.
So this is Leela.
Yeah, Leela, go ahead.
So it seems to me that, and I know that this is a response to some comments, and I like the idea of having one application, but that there's opportunity for confusion, and especially for the construction projects, that they really do need to fill out the whole application, like just the clarity of the fact that yes, they'll be considered for EC funds first, but that we're not going to probably, we don't know, but I would anticipate, like most of the other programs, that I would anticipate we'll get way more requests for funding than we have funding. And so when we say, so especially construction, that they do need to fill out the other sections. Otherwise, they won't be considered for anything but EC funding. Is that accurate?
No, if they only fill out the EC line items, they'll still be considered for the regular SRF, but they just won't score very well. I mean, they're missing opportunities from the other line items that they should.
Which is my point, though, that they, yes, they'll be considered, but if they leave a bunch of stuff blank, they got no chance.
Correct.
So I think that's just as a communication challenge for you all by putting it in one application, that they need to be very clear that if they want to be considered for more than one source of funding, that they need to fill out the whole application.
Yeah, and I hope that'll be as clear as we can make it. Certainly in training, we encourage all the applicants to apply for and provide narrative information for all of the line items that they think they qualify for, because if they don't apply for it, we won't consider it. I mean, we won't go and scour an application and give them priority points for something that they don't claim. That practice
Right.
for a long time.
I think this is if I'm not mistaken, though, that this is the only one where there is another source of funding that will not consider all of the points.
Right.
So they can fill out the whole thing, And then when we're looking at the EC funding, a bunch of the points won't matter.
Correct.
But in order to be, if they don't get EC funding, in order to be considered for other sources, the points then matter. And that's a difference. And I think that just is gonna need to be made abundantly clear.
Yeah, I agree with you, Leela. For applicants, they just need to know you have the full rating system, apply for everything that you see in the full rating system, every line item. That's all the applicants need to know. The work will be on the division staff and SWIA to score it according to which funding source it's going to be funded out of. But yeah, for the applicants, apply for the whole thing. And we'll have to make that really clear in the application training and our application forms.
I think the one thing that might be helpful to us as authority members is to maybe have a demonstration of the new online application tool. I think we're accustomed to seeing the paper application, so it might be interesting and help us understand how grantees would approach and organize their thoughts around applications if we could see kind of what they're looking at now that you've moved to the digital format.
So it's good comment and something we certainly can do. The application form that has been sent in as a paper copy, that's still what they're filling out. It's a full narrative application form supporting documentation. Our online tool really just allows them to leave those in electronic format and submit them electronically to the division for review. There is a number of items that they fill in as part of that that help us get the basic information on the project and to set us up better to do application review. But the actual material considered for application is the same.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Melody and others authority members we have application trainings the first couple of weeks of August. Well, if you wanted to see kind of how the application forms are set up and the guidance and the training that we do, you're always, of course, welcome to attend. One of them is going to be online on August 10th, I think. Just an invitation. Other comments on the use of the EC line items, or which line items for the EC funding? So if you're looking at attachment A, which is pages 10 through 13, which is a drinking water one, the EC funding, the EC line items would be the 1J1 through 1J3, 2F2 being a project that uses regionalization or system partnership as a way to address PFAS. So if the solution is that you are regionalizing your service in order to receive drinking water that has less PFAS, for instance, you can get 2F2 points. 2H3 and 2H4, which is you're addressing PFAS above specific thresholds with the target of reducing the thresholds to below that, or the contamination below that threshold. And then the system management and the affordability points. Those are all considered except for source water protection plan or water loss reduction or water conservation rate structures. Those are for the SRF, for the regular SRF. And then mimic the same thing with the clean water by adding those line items to the clean water SRF or to the clean water rating system. Any comments or questions about those?
This may not be specific to those, but just as I'm mulling over the whole part about having one application. And again, this depends really on how many applications we get. It seems like there's potential. Oh, is there potential then for PFAS projects for SRF funding to basically jump to the front of the line? because they have additional points available if they say that's the sole purpose of the project.
So there are additional priority items for PFAS that will continue to lift those projects up for regular SRF consideration. We saw that this past round. 4 or 5 of the 9 projects were PFAS related. In order to get the project purpose points, the 1J points, they must demonstrate that they're getting the 2H, now 2H4, 2H3 or 2H4 points. So that's potentially 30 points as their base. That's a lot. And that puts those types of projects right up there with addressing non-viability. Scanning through it, which is 25, but those also get additional points. They get the 2B points, also extra 20. So those still will get higher prioritization. But as far as the kind of the base points that you get for a particular project benefit, project purpose, sorry, it's now the highest one.
If you're, sorry,
I
go
have a
ahead.
comment. By removing 2B1, we kind of addressed a little bit. So 2B1 was 20 points, and EC projects were eligible to get 2B1. So by removing that, we are kind of, no longer PFAS projects are no longer eligible for that 20 points. So it shouldn't be that much of a difference next round. That's what we are hoping. That's why we did like that, like removing that 2B1 from PFAS.
Yeah, that's a difference of 10 points from this priority rating system to last year.
10 points, yeah.
Now, it's a little tricky because which project benefit points applied to projects could change the rankings, right? If
Yes.
you've got a project that is replacing old infrastructure without an expansion, that's 20 points on the project purpose points.
Right.
But if it's also doing other things that get project benefit points, that would score higher than a PFAS project.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So it's,
But they have to demonstrate those benefits
Correct.
through the application process. I guess my point was to even get the project purpose points for 1J, they have to also demonstrate the 2H
2H.
points. So just to be eligible for those points, they're starting at 30 points compared to some of the other project purposes, which are not that high.
and can we go back to the non-viability one? If there is a project consolidating non-viable drinking water, wastewater, they're getting the 1A points, which is 25 points, and they're getting, is it 2B1?
2B1.
Which is 20 points,
20
or
10?
2C1, which is
20, okay.
15. So I want to compare a PFAS project with a non-viability project.
Yeah, non-viable is still.
Still high.
significant.
Still the highest.
And they're gonna get the majority of the affordability points as well.
Yeah, but the PFAS projects and the projects that is addressing known MCLs are going to be scoring similarly at this round. So there won't be any lift for PFAS. It will be on the same level because 10 points for 2H1 and 2H3.
No, whether it's proposed
It's a proposed
MCL
MCL versus, yeah, no, proposed MCL or the other known MCL like coliform or, arsenic or whatever, like
one for that.
one for dioxin. All these will be on the same level.
I think what I'm trying to wrap my head around, and like Melody said, it's just a lot, is a project that, so I'm sorry, because I'm looking at this on my computer. So if the project is not consolidating a non-viable utility, but I guess they can get 22 points if it's resolving failed or failing infrastructure issues. So I'm thinking about, what we're always trying to look at is the smaller communities without many resources. But if they have a project that is going to resolve failed or failing infrastructure, then that gets them 22 points versus a large utility who puts in a $40 million PFAS project. So it comes back, and it did show in this funding round a little bit. I guess I'm concerned about very large projects taking a really huge chunk of the funding and then not having much left for the small utilities that are submitting $2 million projects that will make a really huge difference for them.
So,
So Leila, that's why, we said we'll remove the 2B1 from the PFAS eligibility. So that would make that little bit of a difference, not like 20-point difference. If it's a public water supply system.
And also the affordability criteria should continue to lift up those smaller projects or those communities with high rates.
Right.
yeah, so that those points for, I mean, looking at line items for a residential connections, systems serving fewer than 1,000 connections, get 8 points. That's not something that the large ones, or that fewer than 10,000 connections get 2 points. Those need to be elevated. I mean, this is the time to do that. We're finalizing the rating system, so, but.
Yeah, I think that's that's not many. So yeah, there's 8 points, but when we're talking in the 20, 30 points.
Yeah.
And I think I remember going through this at other times where until you actually have some projects side by side and you do some kind of some scoring of them, we can't, it's too hard to wrap our heads around how the score will actually fall out without really going through the whole scoring for some example projects.
Right.
And the two, so I'm not quite understanding the two, when you say the 2B1 is removed from the EC, but I'm not concerned about the EC funding at all. What I'm looking at is the SRF and, principal forgiveness for the once we've already blown through the EC funding.
Actually, we removed that from our base SRF IUP too. So even the base SRF program will, if they are addressing PFAS, they will not get 2B1. So we removed that from the base.
So Leila, the
Right,
small system addressing failing wells, they'll get, not because of PFAS, but it's just failing wells for other reasons, contamination, et cetera. They'll get 2B1 points in addition to the 1B points. So that's 22 points and 20 points. That gives them 42 to start. And the affordability criteria.
Right.
But if the PFAS project, they will not get that.
Yes, I understand. I think and I won't belabor it anymore. I guess I'm concerned about the projects that aren't related to water quality. Like replacing lines, rehabbing lines, water treatment plant, things that aren't getting any water quality points necessarily. So again, so that's enough, I guess, for me. I'm just, we'll just have to see how it plays out, I think. And there may be adjustments, which we're used to doing. So I think you guys have done a good job trying to address everything, and we're just gonna have to see how it goes.
Well, and thanks for the suggestion that I received from Jen. I'm thinking that it might be helpful to keep the conversation going right now, but then we'll take a break before we actually take the action so that you have a few more minutes to think about what's being proposed. And then if you have some more questions, come back after the break. The break was scheduled, I think, for 10:15 or at 10:30. Oh, we might go a little bit earlier. But let's keep the conversation, ask the questions now that you have, and then we'll take a break and come back, see if there's any more thoughts. And if there are some side-by-side comparisons, I know Jen had looked at PFAS projects in the last funding rounds and looked at how those projects scored under the full rating system versus and how those rankings, I don't think the rankings really changed much.
No, I have to go back and look at it.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, and if there's something like that you want the staff to analyze, obviously it'll be hard to do it today, but it could be something we can put onto future agendas.
What seems to protect us on that, I mean, the whole discussion is, the project purpose, you can only get 25. So it's not like, if there's only a net difference of 10, would be would expect to change. Politically.
Well, project purpose, you can only get one of the major
But
lines.
but in general, we can only get 25
25
points. So like when we were talking about a system that might get 1B points, you know, that's only 3 points off of what the max in is. I think we're still following what our ideal was, is to resolve non-volatile systems first. You know, it's gonna play that way.
Yeah, non-viable will still always score
Always.
highest because if they're getting 1A, they're getting 2B1, so they'll automatically get score higher.
But I do feel the same way that Leela does on, you know, huge systems getting $30 million.
Yes.
They can get a chunk of those.
And it might be worth looking again at those 4A line items to see if those points, like Leo said, 2 points, 4 points is not, in the grand scheme of things, might not be enough on prioritized small, but that's a question for the authority.
Just because the system is smaller doesn't mean it's a better product.
Yes.
And maybe this is Leila again, for a future funding round, or maybe, I mean, I guess I wonder if at some point, maybe we reserve a portion of the funds for smaller projects. So kind of like you're doing for the PFAS study projects, where you said, you know, we could eat up all the funding with 3 construction projects, but we're not going to do that. We're going to reserve some for the $500,000 study projects. So maybe for the future, I guess I'd be interested in that discussion of maybe there's some kind of reserve for under $5 million projects or under $3 million projects, where we don't eat up all the funding on the 10, 20, $30 million projects.
Interesting idea. So the drinking water SRF program already has a reserve for small communities that we've been meeting. The clean water program does not have that, a parallel requirement. And in previous rounds, you may remember, we have skipped projects on the drinking water side in order to meet that reserve. Those are typically smaller projects. That's it. So that model is in place and works to do it based off of funding amount and project size. That's an interesting concept too.
Yeah, that's new, Leila. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, because I think obviously the small communities can also have, if they're replacing a plant, can have things in the tens of millions. But that, I mean, it kind of comes back to the principal forgiveness discussion, but there's a lot of projects that we see that are 1, 2, 3 million in the small communities. And you can do a lot of those for $20 million, or you can use that $20 million on one project.
For a system that could borrow the money somewhere else.
Exactly.
And Leila, you're thinking that will be in terms of, it's a reserve that will not just be for small dollar projects, but also only small systems would be eligible for that reserve. It wouldn't be a large system doing a $2 million project would be eligible for that.
Yes, yes. And I think that is part of my thinking is it does come back around to communities that have easier access to other sources of funding. And I know we can't always presume that, but I do think we and share, you know, and maybe the LGC has some ways we can look at that. But anyway, I think that's for future discussion, but I would really be in favor of looking at something like that. And that would, I think, resolve my concerns about these big communities coming in with big PFAS projects and being at the top of the line.
Yeah, well, I think we'll take a look at that for next year, kind of see how this works when look at the data. It's an interesting idea. I will say, of course, that with the SRF funding, the principal forgiveness, that's the additional subsidy that we have with SRFs, including the bill general supplemental. 49% of the bill general supplemental is principal forgiveness. That's being awarded to those that meet affordability criteria. So they're generally the smaller systems or those are in disadvantaged communities or disadvantaged areas. So through the principal forgiveness targets that we have, in addition to the small system reserve that John mentioned, there's also the principal forgiveness target, and that tries to direct projects or funding towards projects that meet those, but yeah, they're not necessarily always the smallest systems getting that. There's some still small, but 20,000 connections, I think, is eligible. You know, and they may get some of that principal. So I think it's being sort of addressed a little bit through the small system reserve and the principal forgiveness targets, but maybe not as explicitly as your suggestion, Leland. It's an interesting idea to kind of investigate. I'm seeing a lot of nodding of heads here in the room as well, just to give you a sense that I think there's consent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
John, you said that there's nothing, no set aside for the clean water. And I'm just wondering, if somebody is concerned about emerging contaminants, they're gonna most likely be concerned about their drinking water and not the wastewater, which goes downstream. I mean, I don't know if we really have to consider that, and I don't know how many utilities are gonna actually ask for the emerging contaminant water funds for wastewater, and that's just a question. I'm just thinking, because most people think of, I gotta provide clean water to the folks in my area.
Yeah,
Just be real.
and regulatorily, when we have proposed MCLs, we've got hazard indexes, all of that is drinking water side. And the wastewater side is more in development. We'll have those goals and standards. Yeah.
No, we don't have a lot of clean water EC funding. We're only talking about for the 2 fiscal years together, we applied for it's $5 million total. So one project can absorb all that pretty quickly. There's not going to be a cap on the clean water EC funds, like we mentioned, 5 million for drinking water. There won't be a cap because again, we only have 5 million to start. But we're also publicly owned landfills are eligible for the EC funding for clean water, because if they're addressing landfill leachates, that's to protect. It's federally, and it's so that the publicly owned landfills could apply. And we actually had one apply a couple of funding rounds ago from a county to address landfill leachate contamination.
It's this year.
Pardon?
Mandated. It's this year for PFAS. Landfills are mandated this year.
Okay, all right,
But still.
well, that's good.
And that's eligible for the, so in addition to
Yeah.
wastewater treatment plants, those landfills that test for PFAS and identify that PFAS and they have a plan to address PFAS would be eligible to apply.
Good.
Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, I'm going to propose that we do take a break before we come back for the staff recommendation, so that you have a little bit more time to think through this, come back fresh with another question, another idea. We appreciate the discussion. So we'll adjourn for, it's 10:18, so why don't we just say 17 minutes, come back at, well, that makes this really hard, 10:35 is what do you all need, I mean, would that be enough, or do you need, it was 10 minutes, do you want it to be 10:30? You want to come back at 10:30? All right, so we will adjourn and reconvene at 10:30. All right, we are reconvened, resuming agenda item Q. So during the break, any of the authority members had any questions or comments they wanted to bring up to resume the discussion? Otherwise, John will have a recommendation for staff, for the authority. Okay, not seeing any unmuting of microphones online. Nobody here seems to have any more questions for discussion. John, if you have a recommendation.
Sure. The recommendation is shown on the slide and in your staff reports. Recommendations are to approve priority rating systems for wastewater construction projects eligible for the funds shown on the slide. Noting that the wastewater reserve and viable utility reserve funds are for capital projects only, and that the clean water SRF bill emerging contaminant funds would only be eligible for this items, the specified line items in the priority rating system. One at a time.
You want to do it one at a time? Okay, so that's the first recommendation, is to look at the wastewater rating system first. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion that, yeah. Which, staff recommendation on wastewater construction project.
All right, thank you. So Bill made the motion to approve the rating system for wastewater construction projects as presented, including the specified line items for emerging contaminants. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, Bernadette seconds. Any questions or discussion on the wastewater priority rating system? Okay, not seeing any, so we can go through votes. We'll go online first, so I'll throw a sound check. Melody?
Aye.
Thank you. Sharon?
Aye.
Thank you. Johan?
Aye.
Thank you. And Leela?
Aye.
Thank you. Maria? And Bernadette?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries. Thank you.
All right, it is also staff's recommendation to approve the priority rating system for drinking water construction projects eligible for funds through the Drinking Water SRF base program, Drinking Water Reserve for capital projects, Vital Utility Reserve for capital projects, and DWSRF bill emerging contaminant funds for those items specified in the priority rating system.
All right, thank you. John, do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion to approve the staff recommendation related to drinking water.
Thank you, Bernadette. So motion's been made to approve the drinking water priority rating system for construction projects as presented, including the specified line items for emerging contaminants. Do we have a second? Maria seconds. Thank you. Any further discussion on drinking water priority rating system? All right, not seeing any. We'll go to votes. Melody?
Aye.
Thank you. Sharon?
Aye.
Johan? Johan? We'll come back to Johan. Let's go to Leela.
Aye.
Thank you. Maria, you made the motion, right?
Or-
Or Bernadette made the motion. Maria?
Aye.
Thank you. Bill?
Aye.
Thank you. And Johan? You're still muted. You might have. Yeah. Johan, if you can, there you
I
go.
can hear you. I was having audio issues. Aye.
Thank you, Johan. Appreciate you fixing the audio issues, and put in the chat, if anybody has audio issues, you can just put in the chat. We'll monitor that too. Thank you. That motion carries. Thank you so much, John, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And appreciate all the discussion from the authority members. This is, and we'll keep learning, keep revising, keep tweaking as we move forward. Next is Colleen presenting on the priority system for the CDBGI funding. Follows suit from previous presentation. This is the action item as well, right?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
So yes, we are going to present to you our final priority rating system for your consideration and approval. Similar to what John already presented, our priority rating system was last approved by the authority last July. We follow the same schedule as the other funding groups, where you saw the draft priority rating system in our April meetings. It went out for public comment in the month of June. Today, you will approve the priority rating system, and then it will be established for the fall application intake round. Unlike John's funding programs, we had no public comments on our priority rating system changes. However, to be consistent with the other funding programs, we are recommending that to combine line items 2H4 and 2H5 previously separated and make them into one, just to simplify the priority rating system and be consistent with the other funding programs, as well as the same 10 points. We are also proposing that line item 2H3 be scored at 5 points instead of 2 points, again, to be consistent with the other funding programs. So this is a view of what the 2H priority would look like, with the previous 2H4 and 2H5 line items struck through and just combine into one new 2H4 line, with a more simplified, language as well as the 10 points. And then the 2H3, striking out the 2 and putting in a 5. And then also the other programs did, we're clarifying the language within the line item itself with that one as well as 2H2. With that, staff recommends the authority approve a priority rating system for the CDBG infrastructure program as shown in the staff report. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Colleen. I did notice for 2H3, there's a typo. We have an extra or state in the rating system. We can just strike that out.
Yep, we'll clean it up.
Thank you. And 2H1 through 2H4 is identical to the drinking water and the clean water.
Yes, and it's the only line items that our program is changing.
Any questions? All right, do we, you already made your recommendation, right?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
Make the motion to approve CDBG program changes as recommended.
Thank
I
you.
second that motion.
Thank you, Johan. So Maria made the motion, Johan seconds. Any further discussion? Of course, with the caveat of removing that 4 states from the 2H3, the extra one. All right, not seeing any discussion, so votes, Melody?
Aye.
Thank you, Sharon?
Aye.
Thank you, Johan?
Aye.
Thank you, Leela?
Aye.
Thank you, Bill?
Aye.
And Bernadette?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to stormwater priority rating system, and this will be presented by Tony. Yeah, this agenda item is also the action item. All right, take it away, Tony.
Thank you, Shadi. So again, I've been tasked with agenda item S, final priority rating system for stormwater construction projects and planning grant studies from the local assistance for stormwater infrastructure program. Just like what you've seen in the other priority rating systems, the last time stormwater construction grants and planning grant priority rating system were changed it was in July. Draft changes were approved in April 18th, 2023 in the SWIA meeting. In your staff report, you have provided a summary of those changes just to kind of get you back up to speed of what we approved in April, as well as red text of the major changes on the priority rating system sheet. So you can refer to that to refresh your memory of what we changed. Then draft changes went to public review, same as the other systems, funding systems, in June 1st through the 30th, 2023. Just like CDBG, we had, they had no comments, we had 2 comments. So very few comments for the stormwater final construction and final planning priority rating systems.
Tony, can you just summarize those 2 comments real quick?
Yeah,
I don't see the staff.
I sure can. Somehow they didn't get put in the sheet, but those comments were, one comment was for line item 1C, where in the guidance, we kind of, the comment was that the change that we made to the priority rating system in 1C will allow reduction in stormwater flow or no storm downstream impacts will be allowed, will allow better stormwater solutions. So they were favorable with that change where we included we took out the, you had to reduce peak flow to either reduction of stormwater flow or no downstream impact. So that was the change, and people were favorable with that change. The other comment was consider the use of the North Carolina Flood Resiliency Blueprint. That's a future program that this commenter was making a point on, and use that in future scoring and evaluation of stormwater projects.
Thank you, Tony. That the flood resiliency blueprint is being developed right now, so it's not quite ready yet for full use for this funding program. But the division is aware of it, and we're in touch with the other divisions and monitoring the progress of that, and to be considered as that's developed. All right.
So brings us to the staff recommendation. Is for SWIA to approve the final priority rating system for stormwater construction projects and stormwater planning projects as presented in the staff report.
Thank you. Any discussion? Again, nothing's being proposed that's different than what the authority had approved in April. We had the discussion then, or changes then. Those have been approved already in April. Nothing's being proposed to be changed this time around, but it's an opportunity to kind of, any more comments on the stormwater construction and the stormwater planning rating systems from the authority members. And we appreciate the comments that we've received, and we encourage more comments as we do public comment periods. All right, not seeing anybody unmuting, so Tony made his recommendation. Do we have a motion?
This is Leila. I'll move to approve the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Leila. Leila's made the motion to approve the staff recommendation for both the stormwater construction projects rating system and the stormwater planning projects rating system. Do we have a second? Bill seconds. Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, and let's take votes. Melody?
Aye.
Thank you. Sharon?
Aye.
Thank you. Juhan?
Aye.
Thank you. Maria?
Aye.
Bernadette?
Aye.
And Bill? Thank you. Motion carries. Rating system is finalized. Thank you, Tony. All right. We are ahead of schedule on our agenda, which is great. Hope we keep that going. No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure at all. None at all. So, I do know that I am the only thing with these next two line items standing between you, lunch and home. So I will be succinct, but I also want to go through the material, especially related to the annual report chapter. As we get into this, what is one word as you as authority members could use to describe this past fiscal year? I'll start with anyone online if you want to throw out a word. Okay, we'll go to the ones in the room. Someone give me one.
Impactful.
Impactive, that's a really good one. I didn't think about that one.
That'll be good. Sharon, Juhan?
Transformational.
Informational, that's a good one too.
Transformation.
Transformative, yeah.
Expansive.
Expansive. So y'all are all coming up with words that I hadn't thought about. I guess if I was thinking about words, it'd be funding. That seems to be, at least, and maybe y'all as an authority have a better feel than I do maybe, but it feels like we spent close to, as an authority, and if I say we interchangeably, I apologize. You as an authority spent probably at least 75% of your time, probably closer to 85 to 90% when you think about everything that went into funding, to developing our funding programs for ARPA. That might be another word someone could use, because it seems like ARPA did dominate, but it was not the only game in town, for sure not. So as you know, with the annual report, it's a legislative requirement. I'm keeping to the main structure, as y'all have. You should have gotten the chapter when I sent out the package last week. So the structure is very similar to the major structure, and of course, it covers last fiscal year. So we're taking kind of a look back and a little bit of a look forward with this. So that ran from July 1 of 22 all the way through this past June. And one of the reasons why I would use funding as my one word is, I think this was an ed request last year, and I'm sorry he isn't here to comment on this year, but you can see for the past 5 fiscal years how our funding went in terms of how many projects you actually awarded versus the amount of dollars you awarded. And you can see the big bumps just last fiscal year. And again, that is because we had such a great influx of ARPA. Because remember, 99% of the ARPA funds were just awarded by you last fiscal year in 1 year. So that's why you see such a huge bump. We'll probably see a little bit more of a valley this next year, but for this past year, it was one for the record books. I don't think we can argue with that. And here's a lot of the accomplishments.
I have If I have a really quick comment on that is, can we not just show it? To me, it would be useful to just show it from the inception of SWIA.
Sure.
Just limiting it to 5 years so that that's an ongoing history, because it also started out way smaller than 100 million.
Yes. Okay. I will write that down. And if someone else can write that down too, in case I lose it, because since I'm presenting. I had thought about that, and I think I just thought, I thought Ed had said something about past 5 years. But yes, I think that's a wonderful idea, because that will see the growth and we can just keep adding on to it year after year. Yeah. And I think that too will catch the Connect and See bonds that we did 6 or 7 years ago. So yes, I will. The great idea, Leila. Thank you. But you funded over 650 projects to the tune of 1.26 billion, roughly. Over 610 of those were ARPA related, and almost $900 million. You had over 240 construction projects, and that was the lion's share, of course, of the funding that went out. But you also funded over 300 AIA grants. Those came from our 2 state funding programs, the SRP and the VUR. And I think one of the big things, one of the most exciting things, is the inaugural round of our LASSI program. That was really, really cool to be a part of from a staff viewpoint and to see awarded in February. Okay, so if you just look at construction, this is how things look. This is the first year we've actually put out co-funded projects listed, and those are projects that are funded from our various programs together, like a piece of SRF funding, maybe it's principal forgiveness put together with an ARPA grant or something like that. The other thing I want to note is I think the high bar where the 70 is at the very top, I think last year that was actually a 60. So the bars may look a little bit different, but or very similar, but the numbers are actually a lot higher. You can see the huge bumps in the state reserves and the viable utility reserves. Keeping in mind, this is the number of applications that were funded. But when you look at dollars, I like.
Real quick, the co-funded projects of a project application is funded from 2. Would they show up in both columns or just one?
Just they would show up under co-funded only.
Oh, there's a co-funded. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Because honestly, when I was trying to put this together, it was about to drive me crazy how we would separate that out. I promise you.
Yeah. No, I didn't realize there was a co-funded separate column there.
Yeah, we tried that. I remember walking into Shadi's office and saying, "How do I do this?" Because it was hard. Okay, I think this chart actually is more telling. This is the dollars. And again, the high bar for last year was like 170 million. So you can see here that, again, our co-funded projects funds, we were able, and this is one of the reasons why I love our priority rating systems and the application process, is because it allows us to easily do these co-funded projects. The big bumps in the viable utility reserve, and that's coming from our ARPA funds for construction. And of course, our state reserves for wastewater and drinking water were pretty high because of ARPA. I don't want to neglect the impact of the SRF programs either. So the CWSRF and DWSRF bars, the first and the third ones there, are pure SRF. So we were able to do some commingling, the co-funded, but a lot of it was pure SRF, and they did make a huge difference. So I don't want to ever neglect the SRF programs simply because ARPA was a huge deal last year.
Yeah, and that included the first round of bill general supplemental SRF, because that was in the February awards, some of the
Yeah.
the first bill funds came out of that, or were awarded in that round.
Yep, also, of course, keep in mind that the July round from last year is what you're seeing in this, not this yesterday's. It kind of is tricky since we're in a brand new fiscal year. So if we look at AIA applications and awards, this is the number of applications that you had come in. And the way that we had it is people were telling us if they were distressed or not distressed. So that's the left-hand bar. And you can see here that almost a third were actually distressed. But when you look at the way that you awarded the applications, a lot of those came out of the state reserve. And some did come out of the VUR. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And there's a little bar at the very top of that right-hand bar that's actually purple. Kind of lines up right on the line. It's not that visible in this slide, but when you look at it and the dollars awarded and requested, again, most of the dollars were coming from our non-distress, some from distress. And the way that you awarded them last year was most of the dollars came out of the SRP and some out of the VUR. And that was because we were saving, or you as an authority wanted to use that VUR funding for construction. So there were some projects that, because of the funding amounts requested, had to come out of the VUR. But for the most part, they came out of the SRP. And then we have that little purple bar, which is actually one or two projects that were co-funded for AIAs between the VUR and SRP. So that was pretty cool to see as well. And what I did looking at the VUR only is I thought about throwing in construction, but then when I did that, like the past slices were so skinny that you couldn't see them because the construction dollars were so high for the VUR. So I just took out the non-construction awards. And you can see here that AIA soaked up almost over 90% of that. The red and the green slices are AIAs. And then the blue is the emergency operating grants. I think you made two or three of those, or one or two, I can't remember. And then the training grants, of course, are the small purple slice. And so you did make, I think it was 15 designations last year that received training grants in that last fiscal year. Okay, and if you move on to LASSI, this is again the inaugural round happened in February, so that's essentially one round's worth of data points. But you had a high demand for construction for stormwater projects, and pretty high demand too for planning. Able to fund a lot more planning than construction, of course. And then the DINU is develop and implement a new utility. Those were the ones that came in. I think we had 4, and you awarded application or funding to all 4 of those projects. I think this is a huge difference right here, the stark difference between the amount of funding requested for stormwater and what you were actually able to award because of what we had in the LASSI fund. And then also, if you look at just a breakdown of all the funds from LASSI that you awarded, you can see here that it's, of course, the vast majority went to construction as expected, the way it was broken down. And I think that was in the budget specified.
Yeah.
So you did exactly what was in the budget. And then that last little bit of planning grant money was just awarded yesterday. So all of LASSI is now officially awarded, which is a good feeling. Okay, American Rescue Plan Act. We need more. We'll talk about that in just a minute.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, ma'am.
So on the LASSI, sorry, I've read through this once, but I can't remember all the details.
Sure.
But, do we ever mention that the LASSI was really targeted to communities that really couldn't afford?
Mm-mm.
And I think we should highlight that because
Yeah.
this is not general, it's not like every single utility could apply. You
Yeah,
had to
I had
have.
to demonstrate financial
Right,
hardship.
and
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing to mention
Mhm.
because that makes the whole thing about the requests
Mhm.
versus the funding.
Yeah.
More important.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that is kind of written into the introductory language. We can certainly add to the report. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good point. Okay, ARPA, this is the last slide. I'm going to talk about ARPA because it's pretty much over now. Way greater than 99% was awarded last year by y'all. And then it came out of pretty much every program. It was every program that ARPA had funding in. And of course, again, I'll talk about the LASSI program got kicked off to great success. So thank you for all of your hard work in reviewing this. And I want to again thank our staff for the hard work that I got to work alongside, shoulder to shoulder with everyone on this. And it was a big lift, and I think we accomplished it pretty darn well.
Did an amazing job awarding it all. The
Yes.
projects are ongoing.
Now now it got kicked back to us, and we are certainly administering that right now as we speak. So the Viable Utilities program was ongoing, and like I said, it wasn't all about ARPA last year. You did do a second reassessment, completed that with a designation adjustments in July, and then also in September you made some more designations as people did want to get into ARPA. And then we began a third reassessment that obviously we wrapped that up yesterday with your designations. The Viable Utilities Committee did meet twice and covered not a lot of topics, but some good topics. Water and sewer district discussion I thought was very interesting. And then began the discussion related to changing the priority rating systems in relation to distressed local government units.
Does the report include specifically talking about distressed units that are under LGCs?
I don't remember.
I think I notes.
I did, I think I did, but it might be good to note this. Thank you, Shadi, for being my note taker. Education, I did provide you all with an update in April. Really quickly, I want to go ahead because we had not completed the spring round of training for that. I want to give y'all some great news. I think I'd said 39% overall that completed their initial education. That flipped up to 60% at the end of May. And we had 3 in-person trainings. I was not able to be at the one in Kernersville, unfortunately, because I was sick, but I know that the 2 I attended, especially the one at Rural Water, were very good. Rural Water was actually surprising because we did open that one up to non-distress. They just had to register for the conference, and we had a lot of good participation across the board on all kinds of systems. So anyway, I will continue to update you all this next fiscal year. Probably will be in the spring again. And hopefully I'll be able to report more numbers after that. Other activities, we did talk about, I think it was in December, the funding cap increases for CDBGI. And then, of course, a lot of priority rating system work related to our lead service lines and LASSI. That was ongoing. You approved the lead service line 1 in April. So that is now, as John mentioned yesterday, out working. And then we also talked to a lot of local government units. NAG's Head came last September and shared about their on-site septic loan program. And then in April, we had a lot of good presentations. Lumber River talked about the status of their regionalization work. I thought that was a very informative presentation, and I think that led to some good discussion. And then, of course, I think everyone would say that learning more about PFAS, I certainly felt like I walked out of that meeting a lot more educated than I was when I walked into the meeting. And then Cape Fear Public Utility Authority, I thought Kenny Waldrop did a fantastic job talking about his project and the challenges that they're facing and how they've handled it. Now, hopefully that's going to be an encouragement to other systems across the state, that it's not like you can't handle it, it's just how do you handle it for your system.
I think it might be worth noting, again, I'm taking notes here, but the CDBGI wasn't just an increase of the cap, we also allowed another round of funding. The spring round was a new round of funding.
Yeah.
Usually it's once a year.
Right.
We allowed 2 this time.
Right. So, yep. Okay, challenges. No annual report is complete without a listing of challenges, recommendations, and next steps. So I'll talk about the challenges. I think a lot of these were from last year, but updated to show the work that we've done and what's been going on. Of course, disadvantaged areas, prioritizing disadvantaged areas continues to be a challenge, and we're working on that, refining that. We're working internally for sure on that, and then as well, we'll bring information to you as the authority when we have it ready, as we have it ready. And then lead service line, we know that's already underway. Emerging contaminants is underway. We did a lot of work on that today. So I'm hoping that next year's annual report will show a lot of fruit borne from that. And then also, Leila, you brought this up in April, and I thought it's a really good challenge that we need to acknowledge. And that is that working with these really small communities like in Robeson and Columbus County is difficult. It's not something that can be solved in several months, a year, 2 years, 4 years. It's going to take many years because it takes a lot of trust being built up and working slowly to keep that trust and to be transparent. And I think that's something that you acknowledge. So feel free when you go through this, to make sure that you comment on that if that's something that you wish to see. And how you would want it fleshed out if I didn't do a good job of it.
Sorry, one more suggestion is, we talked about it today as well, but in previous SWE meetings, the distress units. Lots of demand for funding from distress units, and because of the competition, not all of them got funded. That was a challenge that we've already talked when we're working through the VUC.
Yep.
And, but it's something I think we're bringing out, that we did acknowledge that is a challenge for the year.
Okay. All right, next steps. This is something where some of it's like we do this every year kind of thing, or UOC Authority do, everything related to funding, and that's priority rating systems like we talked about today. We'll do our application intake, provide everything to you for awards in February, and then we already did July yesterday. And then, you know, so it looks at all the 3 project types you see here, water and sewer projects. That includes Bill. For the first time, we'll have the emerging contaminants funding. And then also stormwater planning, and the stormwater planning I put as an asterisk, and that's pending approval of the budget, which is still out there. I'm hoping that we'll have an approved budget by February when you make your next awards.
And the stormwater planning that we approved yesterday.
Yesterday, and that is, yes. Yeah, but I'm hoping we'll have construction as well, like construction and developing and implementing new utilities. And then also we are looking at the VUC, as I think you mentioned yesterday, Shadi, is going to be meeting in August. And so we're going to start looking at how we prioritize that VUR funding, if there are changes we need to propose in the priority rating systems. If we get applications for the decentralized wastewater pilot program, we'll be bringing those to you. And I know this was mentioned yesterday, and I had to kind of start chuckling, is we're going to be starting to update the master plan. So stay tuned. Stay tuned.
We will need a committee.
We will need a committee.
Heads up.
So I don't know when Shadi will be forming that committee, but
Start talking about it in September.
okay, if you can make a note of that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, so we will be looking at that again, because I know it's way overdue for an update. So. And then recommendations, and this is the part where I started turning into a little bit of a data hound. Based on what we did last year with some of the pre-allocated funding, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I looked at all of the stormwater projects that we got in terms of dollars. And so the whole pie is the entire dollar amount. And then the green shades or the blue shades show what you were able to award in terms of dollars, the amount of dollars you awarded. The green shades show what was not able to be awarded, simply because there was not enough funding. So the case in point, when you start reading into the report, is we need more stormwater funding, a lot more. And I think this pie chart shows that. And similarly, what I also did for a viable utility reserve, I didn't have CDBGI in here, but CDBGI and viable utility reserve, I think, serve a lot of the same systems, small, distressed, really struggling. And I know CDBGI at one year had been cut, and then came back. But we want to keep it coming back. But what I did for this pie chart was I took what was in the viable utility reserve. Again, all of the pie is roughly 1.5 billion-ish that were their funding request in terms of dollars that came in. The blue shows what you as the authority were able to award. The green shows what you were not able to award because there was not enough. That was only out of the viable utility reserve. That doesn't show any SRF program awards that were made to distressed systems. But my point was trying to show that there's a lot of demand for the viable utility reserve, not enough funding. So again, that was an ask that I put in there, a recommendation that both of these funding programs keep getting funded because they're very important to our small distressed communities.
So this is the demand or the application we got for all distressed systems?
Yep, applications we got from all distressed systems and who we were able to, or who the authority awarded funding to out of
The VUR,
the VUR only.
but not CDBG?
Nope.
Okay, so we just,
Right.
and the presentation says CDBG,
Right.
but okay, thank you.
But because they serve similar type systems, I was like, these programs are both vital.
So the 131 distressed units in last fiscal year had applied, asking for $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion worth of funding.
1.5.
Oh, one, sorry, yeah, 1.3 that did not get funded.
Right.
1.5 total.
Right.
And 267 million got awarded,
Yeah.
1.5.
Out of the
1.2
VUR.
did not, billion did
Yeah.
not.
And again, keeping in mind that
Out
was
of the
that
VUR.
flash in the pan ARPA funding that is not coming back. So that's why it's like we need to ask for another, that the VUR gets funded. We only have, what was it, 1 million left? And that's reserved for EOGs. Okay, and then this is my, pre-allocations. This is the other one that I thought was very interesting is that this is kind of building on what we did last year. And so the total amount of funding that we had coming into our program, the funding demand is what you the entire pie. So that would be, 6.6 billion-ish. What was able to be awarded by you as the authority was almost only 20%, not even 20%. So that demand is so high, and that shows, I know a lot of people came in because of ARPA, but that just shows that the demand is out there. We need to really think about, okay, well, what would happen if we had no pre-allocations? So actually Friday afternoon at like 5:30, I put together the graph, threw it in there in the presentation. It still wouldn't address, maybe a little bit more than a third if we had no pre-allocations. The light is the pre-allocated funding. The darker blue is what we initially funded. So it pushed the needle some, but that just shows how high our demand is. Just John.
Can you go back one real quick?
The green doesn't really, so I'm just unclear. So the pre-allocated stuff doesn't come through anything we touch.
Right. You
So is
all
it actually part, so the green is, so the pre-allocated is not actually part of that pie.
no.
It's in addition to that pie. So I would just suggest, so I'll make some specific suggestions on some of the
Sure.
graphs.
If you have a better way of presenting it, keep in mind, I was putting this together at like 5:30, 5:45 last Friday when I did that chart.
Yeah, I think, Leila, the point to show is that without the pre-allocated, if those funds were not pre-allocated, then the authority could have awarded that new blue slice. But by pre-allocating, we didn't have access to that light blue slice. So it might maybe just a dotted line or some other way.
Yeah, I understand the point. I think, and I think I'll make some suggestions on some of the
Sure.
wording.
Thank you, Leila.
Yep. So that is, I think, it.
Oh, John, you wanted to go back to the previous slide for some
Oh,
reason.
she already did.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah.
Question, with these numbers, do they include the reconsiderations or only new applications going in?
It includes what we have, like, it does include reconsiderations from each round because it's so hard when you're trying to do like pure new.
Okay.
That can get really complicated. What was being looked at each round? Because to me, each round is like a brand new round, even if we have to reconsider.
So what was considered,
Right.
basically.
Right.
Considered, okay.
Okay.
So Jennifer,
Uh-huh.
is the pre-allocation, the percentage of the monies we got that were pre-allocated, is it higher this year than previous years? Because I know we had a big thing last
Right.
year about it, but I think to see, it'd be good to have a sentence in the narrative here about like, is the trend going up,
Yeah.
the percentage? Because, I mean, that's really, for the narrative, it's really high.
Yeah.
The pre-allocation is unbelievably high. And you know that's a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah. Which is why I put this in here. I was
I
like,
know.
Bernadette's going to look for this. But
Al would love it.
yeah, I think 2021 180, which was ARPA, the main ARPA budget bill, and 2022 74 are both thrown into this past
Right.
slice. And then we don't know about the next budget year since it's not out. I really wish we had that
Well, the
information.
previous year.
It wasn't as high, the 22 one was not as high as the 21 one.
So we're,
I don't think.
21 and 22, we're kind of considering all together because it's ARPA funds.
Right.
They came in the same biennium budgets.
Yeah.
They're just appropriated in the two different fiscal years. So that 1.2 billion is the total across both
Right.
session laws. But there's no trend, we don't have a trend because the previous years there weren't really
I see. All right.
reallocations.
Yeah.
But when the new budget comes out, that's when we'll find out
Be
how
able to
much
start
to be
tracking that.
reallocated.
Okay.
We know that there have been requests.
Yep.
Okay.
And we,
Well,
yeah,
The
Just
request
asking.
that you, if I remember right, the numbers that you gave yesterday.
So the numbers I gave yesterday were congressional directed
Not state,
spending,
yeah.
not state budgets. I'm talking to Bernadette right now about the state budget, but the
Yeah.
congressional, yeah, so
Completely
we can do trends on that, on the congressional directed spending, because that has been going. We have 3 years of data now. So we can show that that demand has gone up on the congressional side. But I was understanding your comment to be the state budget.
Yeah, I think it was. I think maybe
Yeah.
I was just asking because the numbers you said, if I remember, right, it's like 30% or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it was
Oh, it's more than that.
well, yeah, it was huge.
Yeah,
That's what I
90% of what would be,
Right.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge.
So I was trying to put it,
yeah. We could maybe put it in that part then for the congressional budget, we're seeing a trend
Actually,
there.
that would be good. I mean, they're both problematic, right?
Correct.
I mean, they don't hold,
Yeah,
like, you put the two together and go, whoa.
yeah. And also, lost my train of thought, pre-allocations, give me a minute. I just lost my train of thought and went right out. I'll come back to it. John, you had a.
Yeah, just, I wanted to point out in previous years, if, on the state side, if they did do pre-allocation or special appropriations, it was done outside of the water infrastructure fund. So it wasn't, you really couldn't see it as a direct impact to the funds that we were getting through the annual appropriation.
Right.
This is this past year, past 2 years budgets, when you could really see it. It's funds to the water infrastructure fund that were then immediately pulled out and going to the communities.
Yeah. So what we are also doing now in the annual reports is last year, I think it's the first year we did it, is we do have a section in like the state reserve chapter and the viable utility reserve chapter related to pre-allocations that, you know, we can make reference to those if we want more details. And we will be tracking that as it comes
Yeah.
in. Because I do agree. I think I'd like to see what the trends are, if they're going up or down.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's really very important,
Yeah.
especially related to the viable utility.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I think
Yeah,
pre-allocation is really problematic.
absolutely. I agree. So that wraps up
This
the.
is, I have another comment about that really quickly, I guess. So to me, for the graph and the trend purposes, I guess I would not include here the total requests. I think that could be noted in the text sort of, but to me, the key here, and John, you mentioned that it was awarded outside of the funding, but wasn't it still administered by your staff, by your group?
Yes.
So I think, to me, I would try to include that unless it's just problematic for you, because we have been talking about this since the inception of SWIA.
Mhm.
And I think it's valuable, and that can be a little asterisk of, you know, for these years, it was included in, the way that it was funded isn't really the important part, whether it went
Right.
through our funds or not. But the point, I think the dark blue and the light blue are the two numbers. Like, here's how much total water, wastewater infrastructure funding, or here's how much total water infrastructure funding there was in this year. Here's how much of that was pre-allocated. And to me, that's the key. And that's been going on since 2014 when we did our first funding rounds, I think. And so,
Yeah.
and then there can be an asterisk if you feel like you need to say the way the money came was put, the buckets they put the money in may have been different. But the point is, here's how much money they decided to spend, and here's how much of it did not go through a competitive process.
Right. And also,
I And then I think there could also be a comment, as you know, to put this in perspective, if that pre-allocated money had been available to the program, you know, we still could have only funded 20% more of the projects that we got applications for or something.
Yep. And also, I think one of the reasons why we need to track it in those specific chapters I mentioned, which are the divisions part of the annual report, is because it is, even though it's outside of the water infrastructure fund, so maybe outside of SWIA's purview, is that it's a burden on our staff. I mean, you know, a
Yes.
project is a project, no matter how big or small it is, it still has to be administered.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yep, yep.
Can we go back one slide? Sorry. So the 5.4 billion is what was not awarded, or not, we couldn't award.
Right.
If we go back to the next slide, so I think what Leela, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're trying to show total, I think that green slice would not be the 4.2 billion, it would be back to the 5 point something billion. So we'd show the total that was not funded, the total that was funded, and the total that was funded out of
I think
pre-allotments.
we're gonna have to figure out how to present it better.
Yeah, and I can follow up. I guess my suggestion is when we're talking about the issue of pre-allocation, I wouldn't even put in the pie chart the money, the applications we got that we didn't fund. I think that is key in talking about Congress and the state. Here's the funding that was allocated. Here's the funding we were given. Or here's the funding that was allocated. And out of that funding, here's the amount that went through a competitive process, and here's the amount that was pre-allocated. And then I think, so I wouldn't put in the graph that we got, 10 times more applications than that. I think that's a separate point, is the demand is way higher than the amount they're funding. I think those are two different topics. Is the demand is way higher than the amount that's being funded. And the second topic is, out of the amount that's funded, you guys give away a bunch of it before it gets competitive. And so most people don't have access to that.
Yep. Okay,
Thank you.
yeah.
So, I mean,
Cody.
so I think there's also an interesting question to ask about pre-allocations, and that's kind of the who and the why, and some analysis around that in terms of, who are these local governments that are getting the pre-allocations and why? Is it that they have been exceedingly unsuccessful in the past in submitting competitive and funded applications? Is it because these are extraordinarily large projects that could not hope to receive the amount of funding that they need through the competitive process? So I think trying to understand the who and the why could help form an argument about, are there different ways that we can address these particular problems and concerns that lead to pre-allocations, as opposed to just looking at it from, this is a problem, trying to figure out, okay, well, what is the perceived problem about the need for pre-allocations, and how can we look at what those trends are and see if there are ways that we can mitigate some of the, the causation around why those may happen. And it may just be, good relationships between local governments and legislators, but are there some trends that we can see about the who and the why with regard to that? So that would be kind of my first point about pre-allocations. And then my second point is, because I love to just sort of think about, okay, how are we doing what we're doing? How can we look at how we might look at ways that may have different results? And while I think we all love to see demand, here we've got, $5 billion in demand for $1.2 billion in funding. And, that's great. Demand is great. But I also look at it as unrealized potential, unrealized time and effort for local governments, when many, we discuss all the time, don't have time and effort and money. And so every time they fill out an unrealized funding application, means that they didn't spend the time somewhere else. They didn't spend the money somewhere else, and they didn't get a result from it. And so I would love to think about, how can we think about reducing the number of applications that we receive to better target the amount of money that we have available so that we limit that unrealized potential and potentially get funding to the absolute most critical projects. And that's not taking anything away from the priority rating system, because I believe that has been and is a very valuable system for rating applications. But I think we can all agree that sometimes local governments don't submit good applications, not because it isn't a good project, but because the application is terrible. You know, there are missing pieces and parts and, just perhaps just a poorly put together application, but the project is actually really, really good and really, really needed, but it doesn't score and it doesn't get funded. So I would like, maybe not for fall, but to look at ways that maybe we can reduce that burden where people are submitting unrealized applications, and that when an application is submitted, it truly reflects the quality of the project versus just the application. So those are 2 points. And then a third point, I would love to see the number of applications over the last, let's just say, SWIA inception, 5 years, that have gone to the same local governments and who we've never funded at all. Because I don't know about you guys, but I was thrilled to see that list of all 500 of the utilities in North Carolina. I thought, oh my gosh, this is great. Maybe it's been out there before, but I feel like it's the first time I've seen it. So I would love to know who's getting multiple funding opportunities, and then who have we never funded and why, and are they doing okay? So and to be able to maybe take some of that as lessons learned for local governments that aren't particularly always sort of chasing grant funds, but they're making it, if that makes sense. So 3 points: looking at the future, thinking about strategic planning.
I think those, we have so much more information now. When we did the first master plan, we had almost no data about needs, and like you were saying, the list of utilities and how many times they've applied. Like, we didn't have anything because it was so new. So I think that type of stuff you're talking about, Melody, is going to really help drive the next master plan to be a whole other level than the first one. Another level of detail and of looking at some of the nuts and bolts of it. And one thing I would say about the unmet need and the resources, there were quite a few years. So before we had the boatload of money that got dumped in, there was not nearly the discrepancy of applications and funding. So I would say that the history of that, I do think, is important to show, because this huge pie here is because the federal government dumped however many gazillion dollars on us, which we didn't have before. So I mean, I remember many times for drinking water, especially, we funded every application.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah. Thank you, Leila.
So maybe it's kind of a set of data for us to look at that is pre-ARPA and then during ARPA. But I think one thing that ARPA showed us is there are a lot of projects out there. And then just one additional point is, that the AIAs are such a tremendous value to the local governments, and I think to us as well. And having those potential the state of the system and the potential projects that are needed could be a way that we could, over the long term, see the state of particular systems and also their future needs, and to better forecast for every utility. Because I mean, 500 is a lot, but it's not 10,000. And so if there was a way that we could get to a place where we had a handle on even the majority of utilities and kind of where they were at and what their forecasted needs were in priority, some sort of priority, then perhaps we could, almost like moving pieces on, a chessboard, move the money where it's needed most based upon forecasting versus kind of a reactionary, this is what we got, so these are the choices we make. And instead are looking more at a forecasted set of projects that have been out there and we have access to. And one of the great things about the AI is if we could get those digitally into some sort of a system, whatever, I think you guys might be using Dynamics or Salesforce or whatever it might be, where those plans could be updated and those projects could be prioritized, and then over time potentially get the majority of projects into that, where you could do some forecasting. So just dreaming big.
Bernadette.
So I really like the comments you made, Melody. I just think in the idea of getting a big picture of how many utilities have actually gotten funding since we have started. So it should include the ones that have had pre-allocation projects, because you know that, right? Because you administer them. And so then what you want to see is the big picture, so you know like what ones have not gotten anything, either pre-allocation or from SWIA. But I think one complicating thing, and based on I think a conversation I had with you last year, is that my understanding is that pre-allocation does not necessarily mean it goes to a water or sewer project. Is that correct?
So
You don't always know. I just, that,
the one,
it's a complication.
So I've just sent Jen a list of all the pre-allocations since 2014 that the division has worked on. Those are all water and wastewater.
They're all what?
Water, wastewater.
Okay.
And stormwater.
Okay, so they all were
They
actually,
include stormwater as well.
they all were used for water and wastewater.
And that's all the way from 2014.
That come through our
That
division.
that the division touched, or we were responsible for getting that funds to that recipient.
Did it come out of our money?
So that's not clear. It's a line item in the budget saying such and such community is getting such and such amount of money to do a project. And sometimes it's to do water or wastewater, sometimes it's to do pump station number 4. And then our staff help that community meet the statutory requirements to be eligible for these funds. There's not that many of those until ARPA came along, and now there's hundreds. But ARPA was very specific in that it's funds going to the water infrastructure fund and then immediately eligible into those communities.
There are other pre-allocations, but they don't come to our division. Our division only really administers the water, wastewater, and stormwater ones, but other ones don't come our way, so we wouldn't comment on those.
Okay, so it's not pre-allocation, it's taken out of money that was originally allocated to SWIA.
It's not coming out of, I don't know if I can say always, but it's not
Okay.
coming out of the 10 million.
Well, and I think early on, it was a little, and it'll depend on looking at the data. So John may remember, Jennifer may remember, or Maria, but I think we had so little funding in the early years that those pre-allocations, like they may not sound big now, but they were similar, like they dwarfed, like the state was providing no funding early on, when it was like, I don't know, $50,000 or something ridiculous. So the timeline will be very interesting. Like I just have anecdotal memories of it, and you know, and the Cal Stiles Memorial conversation about how awful the pre-allocations were.
Yeah. I do remember that.
Yeah, but I think that the history of it has been dramatically impacted by the level of funding at the time.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll have to look at that. I think that would be, a lot of the discussion, I think, is going to be very good seeds for the master plan. Maybe not in the purview of this annual report, but for the master plan update, I think all of this is going to go into somewhere in the master plan.
Yeah, I agree. I think these are great discussions for the master plan.
We've got a couple of comments in response to some things that you all have brought up. Thank you. One is that we are actually planning to do, looking back at all the applications and funded projects to get trends and analysis of who's been funded, who's not. It wasn't specifically about the pre-allocations versus non, it was just generally. So we're working on that. On the pre-allocations, I don't remember who asked, but somebody asked like, why do they have what are they using it for? That's a little bit more nuanced response, because some local governments are using it for an infrastructure project that came out of an AIA, or they have an infrastructure project in their CIP, or they're putting more funding to a project that SWE had already awarded. So they're just adding more to an existing project. Or they have an allocation and they're applying for SWE, and if SWE awards this project, they'll use their allocation for another capital project that they've got. Keeping in mind that back in 2017, when the needs assessment, when SWE looked at needs for drinking water, wastewater infrastructure, estimated about $17 to $26 billion over a 20-year window. That's where we're seeing all these numbers, these big dollar amounts coming out. It's not that people are just making up stuff. This is all projects. And they're either being funded out of SWEA or they're being funded out of the pre-allotments. But even all of that combined is still not the full need for the state. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that comment. I'm starting to ramble a little bit, so I'm going to stop here, but just kind of bring that up as well. John?
Yeah, I needed to clarify. I'm looking at the historical records of some of these appropriations, special appropriations. And I guess from what I'm seeing, I can't tell if it came out of the annual appropriations or not. It looks like some of them were, and some of them may not have been. So it's likely that they were impacting competitive funds available to communities. Just want to clarify.
So the other comment I guess I want to make, Shadi, you just brought up the total amount of funding we projected. And again, this is a way I think we might have more information. So the vast majority of dollars spent on water and wastewater in the state is spent by the really large utilities, and they can do it with revenue funds. If they can get SRF funds, great. It's a little lower interest rate. If they don't, they move forward anyway with their $500 million project.
Right.
And so that is, I think, another really key piece of information, which, you know, I alluded to before, because it's like any other kind of spending in a whole category. You're going to have a lot of big stuff that takes up the vast majority of the money, but then the stuff spent on little projects affects way more communities. And out of those 500, Melody, you know, that's where I think, and that's where we were sort of always headed with the viability conversation. The vast majority of infrastructure funding shouldn't come through SWEA. In the state, we shouldn't be responsible for most, I mean, just play with the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of water and wastewater infrastructure should be funded by utilities with their rates. And maybe get SRF funding, but even that's not even necessary. So really it's the 20% that don't have any other way to get the money. They don't have the staff, they don't have the resources. I mean, that's where we were focusing. It's the ones that aren't viable. they can't get funding, they can't figure out how to fund. And those are the ones that really, it's the government is here to help you. Most of the other ones don't actually need government help.
Yeah, I would say lots of systems, yes. I'm not sure if it's most or not, or lots, but it's lots of systems that could generate their own revenues, like you're saying. And
Well,
a lot of it, I think
It's
I
the
remember-
ones, it's the few utilities that represent the vast majority of customers in the state.
And the bonds, the revenue bonds that were generated create more funding than SWIA funds awarded, at least historically, pre-ARPA. I haven't looked at
Oh,
it.
by far, by orders of magnitude, probably.
But yeah, so that's, yeah, Leela's, I think your point is spot on, that there's other sources of funding and can't expect SWIA, can't expect the state or even the federal government and the state combined to be able to fund the total needs for the whole state. That's not the goal. Nobody's thinking that would be the goal. Local governments still have to be able to generate as well. And there are different levels of doing that. Some that are going to be more able to do that than others. And the focusing on our priority to the systems that can't generate their own revenues. That's where the funding should go. So I'm not sure where to put all of that into and if you have suggestions, I mean, you all have the draft chapter from Jen. If you have thoughts, Jen, how do you want them to?
Fancy, you should ask.
Great.
All right. I did this document in Word. We are actually switching to a Word format for all of our annual reporting. So my suggestion is when you go in there, make comments in the track changes version of Word. Send them back to me individually by August 21st. And what I'll do is we'll take those and work them in. I think the challenge is going to be from this past discussion to figure out what is necessary for the annual report versus what is a master plan suggestion. So if you want to separate that out, as you give it some thought, that would be one way to do it. So please do get it back to me. Note our domain names have changed. Y'all have noticed that in my emails, but that's changed. But what we'll be doing then is we'll incorporate that into the annual report. Bring it back to you in September for your review and approval. If you still have some more changes, we'll have the meeting in October to make those final changes. So you'll have a couple of more times if you want to look at the annual report. Well, one more time after this. We do have to turn it into the legislature by November 1. So just be aware of that. And I think that is it for the annual report. Great discussion. I think we got some ideas because when I was thinking about, okay, how are we going to do this master plan? I'm like, I have no idea where to start. So I think we've got some good discussions for the start now. All right. Any other questions related to annual report?
You have the Word version? I'm not sure I do.
I can send that out. I will send that out to the authority. Shadi, can you make a note of that? I will send that out to the authority this afternoon so you can have that to look at it. I've forgotten that I'd put it into the PDF version for y'all. So I'll send it out in Word to everyone and you can make comments and get it back to us.
And would you also send the list of utility units, the 500 utility units, as a Excel document,
Sure.
please?
That list is only local government utilities. That's all right with you, Melody? I mean, there are other utilities.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, and that will probably come in a separate email. We'll see though. We'll try to get it to you by the end of this week, both of those items. Okay.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Great discussion. I think we have one more agenda item.
One more, and I know now I'm really the only thing standing between you and lunch and home, is the draft meeting schedule. I can't believe we're talking about 2024 when it's like 92 degrees out and 80% humidity, but we are. Here's the schedule that we're proposing. We as a division are going to be looking internally at our workflows because I can tell you just from personal experience for the past 3 years that June and July nearly kill me. So we may move some of our items that we discuss around. We just have to look at it, but please do check these dates and let us know if there's a conflict. I know like for you, Sharon, especially having to miss yesterday, we'd love to have you at both days. So if we need to change the dates, we can. You can, again, just email me individually if you're like, hey, this day is completely out. But, you know, I just want you to take a look at your calendars. You'll be voting on this as well in September. And what I'll do is after we finalize it, I'll start setting things up for next year, which is just so weird to say in July. That is all I've got.
Just point out that we're making it more formal, that the July
Yeah.
meeting is going to be expected to be 2 days
Yeah.
and the September being 1
1
day
day.
going. So it used to be the other way around.
Yeah,
But given that we have awards and we have rating systems
yeah.
and this agenda that we have the past couple of days, it's going to be pretty common in July. Makes more sense to keep it as 2 days in July.
And also, one thing to note, March and October's meetings are generally hold meetings. Like if we need the October meeting for the annual report, we can have it. We try to cancel that one. March is usually a snow day kind of a meeting in case we don't have February's. Because I remember there was a stretch of years where every single time we had an authority meeting in February, it snowed. So keep that in mind too, John.
Just thinking about the lead service line
Yep.
program and potential to have awards on multiple meetings. Just
Okay.
have to nail these down early as we can
Yeah.
to make it known to the public.
Yeah, we should know about the October one. I would suggest not scheduling any lead service line ones in October. Because we have generally, traditionally, I think we've had that meeting maybe once outside of when we were forming the viable utility program.
Yeah, just so it's clear to
Yeah.
to the customers.
And again, what Jen said is that this division is taking a look at this calendar as well to look at milestones and dates when the applications are due and how quickly we can turn things around to SWIA. So this is a draft, right?
Yep.
Proposed, but we may tweak it a little bit further,
But we'll see.
but we'll see.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
I think that's all I've got.
Thank you. Next agenda items, informal comments from the public. I haven't checked, last I checked, yeah, we're gonna check and see if anybody had signed up. Has there been anybody in the room who signed up for a comment? Okay, nope. And there were none that were signed up online. You have the clicker? Next slide, please. Okay, so we're at the end of the agenda. So thank you, everybody, and we'll do remarks, closing remarks from the members and from council, and I'll go last again. We can go online, see if anybody has any closing remarks. Melody, do you want to kick us off?
Well, I think this has been an excellent meeting. And certainly thank you to staff for being able to take, again, all of the complex items and thought processes and just what you do to provide us with material that we can think about and digest and talk about. So thank you certainly to staff, and just really appreciate your hard work and the way that you approach your work to benefit as many communities as possible, with special thought to those that need the most. So thanks so much. Appreciate you all.
Thank you, Melody. Sharon?
Just kind of ditto what Melody said. Thanks to the staff for a very extensive and complete agenda. I wish I could have been in attendance yesterday, but they wanted me to talk about GASB yesterday at the conference. So, you know, I would have much rather been discussing water sewer funding. But thanks to everybody, and look forward to our next meeting.
Thank you, Sharon. We can update you, of course, on all the actions from yesterday as well. Thanks, Sharon.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Leela? Sorry, Leela? All right,
I have nothing to add. Thanks for all the hard work.
all right, thanks, Leela. And Johan had to step away, so he's not online. Maria?
When I looked at the annual report, I mean, it makes it look like we did that work, like y'all did that work. So like all those applications that were funded, like they were funded because the staff reviewed them and gave us good information. And like we talked about how, like I said, we got done so early yesterday. It's just because everything was super, I mean, it always is, but it was clear and it was easy and y'all make it so easy. So thank you.
That,
Echo those comments, and I just want to say it's very exciting to know that here with revising the master plan, and we have data for, we can see trends, and that everybody is oriented towards that. I think we will come up with some even better plans, a better master plan, because we have information that staff will look at and will discuss. So I'm very looking forward to that.
thank you, Bernadette. Bill?
Just saying, thanks to the staff, and that's, you know, the big thing is having good people to do this kind of work, and it makes the authority members' job easier. It really does, and again, it's a good learning, it continues to be a good learning experience for me. You know, our county deals with about 100. And it's good, you know, we're in the same position, we have good people that do this kind of work, and it makes our jobs much easier, so we appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Bill. Barry, any comments?
I wanted to talk about the reallocations and stuff, just from a really big government point of view. I don't have the data, but if you think about this authority was formed in 2014 because the legislature wanted to have a body such as yourself as opposed to staff at DEQ making huge dollar allocations. But even the agency was taking over the legislature's job. I mean, the legislature handles the money for our state. They can, and sometimes do, as we see, allocate for specific projects. So from thinking about it from a governmental point of view, I mean, you're the flow through, and it's really, you're doing quasi legislative work that they've delegated to you. And so if they sometimes pull back a little or put an additional pot of money on and then ask you to, your staff to administer the projects, that's really kind of working the way government works. Now, of course, nobody wants work. They wanted you guys to do it because you have the matrices and you're doing it in a very fair manner. But it's really fascinating for me to kind of see that working here. And that's, you know, not part of your discussions on, you know, have to step back, but it made me think back to my study of government and poli-sci and all that kind of stuff, because this is really government at work. So you don't have to include that all, Jen. You know? I really appreciate seeing government working, and thank you all for what you do.
Thank you for that big picture, Mary.
Yeah.
All right, well, yeah, and that I echo, the staff has been amazing. I can't keep saying that enough. And thank the authority members as well. I also want to thank all the public comments, all the people who submitted public comments for all of the different funding programs, including those that were in lead service line a few months ago. All that input from public is really helpful. And we've had lots of interest in the funding and all the new programs coming up and everything that happened with Lassie, that program. That's all great. This funding rounds, this spring round, again, just the numbers I mentioned yesterday, I'll repeat them again. Yesterday, you awarded 60 projects for $223 million, a little bit more than $223 million, 27.7 in grants, 30 million in principal given, and 165.2 in loans. The demand far exceeded funding. And I believe SWIA has designated 14 local governments as distressed yesterday, but it will go to the LGC for their designations as well. Sharon, that concludes my summary of the action. That basically, I think, is but we can go into more details for what was passed yesterday. Appreciate everybody's work. We have a lot coming up. The Viable Utilities Committee meeting is actually going to be on August 15th. I think I might have said 21st yesterday by mistake. August 15th. I said 15th. Okay, great. I thought I said the 21st. In my head, it was the 21st, but it's the 15th. August 15th is the Viable Utilities Committee to continue the discussions as we heard in the presentations today, and looking forward to starting to think about the master plan updates and coming up with a committee for that and working on that, and we'll bring that up in the next September meeting, as well as the first awards for lead service lines. Looking forward to that in the next meeting as well. All right, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.